Something shifted in Britain, and most people missed it. Not a headline, not a single moment you can point to. Just a quiet, grinding change that crept into towns and cities and villages while everyone was busy watching their energy bills and arguing about the price of a weekly shop. Right now, across the United Kingdom, around 900,000 people are living in caravans, camper vans, and static homes, not because they want to, not because it is a lifestyle choice, not because they watched a video about freedom and sold their furniture. They are doing it because it is the only roof they can afford. And nobody is talking about it. This is not a fringe group. 900,000 people is bigger than the population of Leeds. It is more people than live in the whole of Belfast, Cardiff, and Aberdeen combined. They are your neighbors, your family members, the woman who served you at the pharmacy, the man who fixes your boiler. They are people who did everything right and still ended up parked in a field because the alternative was the street. Here is what most people do not realize. This is not a new problem that appeared overnight. It has been building for years, slowly, steadily, like water finding a crack in a wall. But in 2026, something cracked wide open, and the numbers we are seeing now are unlike anything recorded in modern Britain. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how it happened, who it is happening to, and why it is spreading faster than anyone expected. Take Margaret. She is 63 years old. She worked as a school dinner lady in Stoke-on-Trent for 22 years. When her private landlord sold up in 2023, she was given 2 months to leave a house she had rented for 11 years. She spent 7 months on the council waiting list. She applied for 38 properties. She was turned down for all of them. Today, she lives in a static caravan on a site 12 miles outside the city. She pays £480 a month in site fees and pitch rent. She told a housing charity, and I am quoting her directly here, "I kept thinking it would be temporary." That was 2.5 years ago. Margaret is not an outlier. She is a pattern. So how did Britain get here? And more importantly, why is it getting worse? The first thing you need to understand is that this crisis was built on a foundation of vanishing affordable housing, and it did not happen by accident. It happened through specific choices that were made over decades. The proportion of social housing stock in England fell from around 30% in the early 1980s to roughly 17% by the early 2020s. That is not a small dip. That is the systematic removal of the safety net that once caught people like Margaret before they hit the ground. When social housing disappears, people cascade into the private rented sector. When the private rented sector becomes unaffordable, they cascade further. And the bottom of that cascade, the place where people land when every other door has closed, is increasingly a caravan site, a converted van, or a static home on a plot of land that barely meets legal standards for habitation. The Office for National Statistics has tracked this shift for years. The data shows that the number of households in England alone living in non-traditional accommodation, a category that includes caravans and mobile homes, has grown consistently since 2015. But the acceleration we have seen between 2022 and 2026 is in a different category entirely. The cost of living crisis did not create this problem. It detonated it. Here's what that looks like in practice. Average private rents in England hit a record high in 2025. Outside London, the average 2-bedroom rental was costing renters well over £1,000 a month. In parts of the southwest, the southeast, and the commuter belts of major cities, finding anything under £1,200 a month for 2 bedrooms had become functionally impossible for anyone on an average wage or benefits. And council waiting lists in some areas had stretched beyond 10 years. So people did the maths. A static caravan on a residential site in the cheaper parts of the country can cost between £300 and £550 a month in site fees. A camper van, once bought outright, costs nothing but fuel and parking. The numbers are brutal, but they are honest. And for hundreds of thousands of people, they were the only numbers that worked. And here is the part that should stop you in your tracks. Many of these people are working. They are not on the margins of the economy. They are in it every single day. Lorry drivers who park their vehicles, climb into a camper van, and sleep before the next shift. Nurses who finish a night shift and drive back to a static home they share with a partner and a child because a rented flat in the same town would cost them half their take-home pay. Teaching assistants, retail workers, scaffolders, people doing the work Britain depends on, living in conditions Britain would rather not look at. If this is making sense to you, if any of this sounds familiar from your own town or your own street, drop your town in the comments. You would be surprised how many places across Britain this is already touching. Now, it would be dishonest not to say this. Caravan and mobile home living is not always distress. There is a genuine and long-standing tradition of static home communities in Britain, from coastal sites in Norfolk and Wales to retired communities in the Northwest, who chose this life deliberately and built something good in it. To be fair, that tradition is real and it matters. The people who chose this, who planned for it, who own their plot and their community, are not the same as the people being pushed into it with nowhere else to go. Both things are true at the same time. But the growth we are seeing now is overwhelmingly driven by compulsion, not choice. And conflating the two lets the real problem stay invisible. Which brings us to the part of this that is genuinely new in 2026. The caravan parks and static home sites were not built to absorb a housing overflow. They were built for leisure, for retirement, for seasonal workers. Their infrastructure is limited, their legal status is complicated, and the people running them are caught in an impossible position between a genuine need and a regulatory framework that was written for a different era. Here is what most people do not realize about the legal side. Many residential caravan sites operate under licenses that technically only permit habitation for a fixed number of months per year, sometimes 10 or 11 months, sometimes less. Residents who live there year-round, as many now do, are technically in breach of their license conditions, which means they have no legal security of tenure. They can be moved on. They have fewer rights than a private tenant in a rented flat. They pay their fees, they follow the rules, they make their homes, and they sit on a legal fault line that nobody in power seems in a hurry to fix. And the sites themselves are aging. Some of them are on floodplains. Some have power supplies that were never designed for full-time residential use. Some do not have reliable connections to gas or mains water. In the winter of 2024 to 2025, there were multiple reports from advocacy groups of caravans in Britain without adequate heating, occupied by families with young children, during weeks when temperatures dropped below freezing. That is not a headline from another country, that is here. Councils know about this, the NHS knows about it, debt charities know about it. And yet the official count of people in this situation, when it appears at all, tends to be buried in footnotes and described with language so careful and cautious that it barely registers as a crisis. The real number, 900,000, comes from aggregating data from housing surveys, site registration records, and charitable sector reporting. There is no single government source that tracks this cleanly. And when something is not counted properly, it is very easy not to fix it. This is where it gets harder. Because the solution is not a caravan park. The solution is housing. Genuinely affordable, secure, long-term social housing in the places where people actually need to live. Not 30 miles from their job and their family and their doctor. Not subject to the whims of a private landlord who can sell up at 2 months' notice. Housing that holds. But here is the honest reckoning. Building that takes time. Planning processes, land acquisition, construction, decades of underfunding in the sector. There is no version of this where the problem is solved quickly, which means for a very large number of people in Britain in 2026, the caravan is not a stepping stone to something better. It is the destination. And most of them arrive there not through recklessness or failure, but through the slow, relentless pressure of a housing market that stopped working for ordinary people a long time ago. Think about what that means for the wider picture. Council tax revenue, National Health Service registration, school places, community ties. All of these systems are built around the assumption that people live in stable, registered addresses. When hundreds of thousands of people fall outside that assumption, they do not just struggle themselves. They create invisible gaps in the infrastructure that everyone depends on. You cannot get a GP easily without a fixed address. You struggle to open a bank account. You find it harder to register for universal credit or to maintain the record that benefits and services require. The caravan becomes not just a shelter problem, but a participation problem. A slow, grinding exclusion from the basic machinery of British life. Margaret knows this. She has a forwarding address at a friend's house, which she uses for official letters. She has not told most people where she actually lives. She said she feels embarrassed. She said she feels like she has been left behind by a country she served for most of her life. And she said something else that has stayed with me. She said, "I am not angry at anyone in particular. I just do not understand how this was allowed to happen." That question deserves an honest answer. And the honest answer is that it was allowed to happen gradually, through the accumulation of choices that prioritized short-term economics over long-term stability, that treated housing as an asset class rather than a human need, and that left the bottom of the market with no floor. None of that is the fault of the people sleeping in caravans in January. And the fact that it is spreading faster than anyone expected should not be a statistic, it should be a reckoning. Something is changing across Britain. You can feel it in the way people talk about where they live, or where they used to live, or where their children will never be able to afford to live. You can feel it in the resignation that has settled into conversations about housing, a kind of collective acceptance that this is just how it is now. But 900,000 people sleeping in caravans just to survive is not how it has to be. It is how it became. And there is a difference. A like helps more people find it, takes 1 second. What this story makes you think about, what you have seen in your own area, or whether you know someone in this situation, drop it in the comments. Because the more people who name this, the harder it becomes to ignore.